Hello. Happy Friday. Noelle will be joining me here shortly. We're going to talk about the wines from this past Wednesday's exam for the WSET diploma that a lot of folks took, both the D4 Sparkling and D5 Fortified. The wines were released yesterday. There's Noelle. Let's get her going. There we go. All right.
Hey,
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, doing good. Doing good.
Good.
I think there might
Um,
be a football match going on at the pub down the street there because I'm hearing cheering. So they're not cheering for me, I know. But
they might be cheering for people who passed their D3. So let's give a
that's
congratulations
true.
to everybody who
Yeah.
that we've heard from so far who has passed their
Mhm.
D3.
Yeah, very
So,
much. Congrats. Yeah, from the October exams.
yep, huge hurdle. And I'm impressed that the wines for D4 and D5 came out so quickly.
Hmm.
That's great. Well, at least you don't have to deal with, the unknown over the weekend. So, um, everyone I've talked to so far seems okay. I haven't talked to a lot of sparkling wine folks. So if you did happen to take D4, I would love to hear from you what you think of the wines, but did hear a number of D5 people. So
Mhm.
are we ready to tackle this?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm covering D4, so I'll start. And the wines, these all, I'm having deja vu, Amber. These
Yeah.
all, yes. And students should pay attention because all these sparkling wines have shown up in the past 18 months on exams. So they started out with a cava, followed by a Tasmanian traditional method,
Hmm.
and last was Grasparosa Lambrusco. So we're never going to say anything about an exam being easy because we didn't sit it. So I think these are fair. But again, I didn't sit it. And there's a lot of exam pressure, and you could easily make mistakes in an exam that you wouldn't when you're not in an exam setting. So that being said, Kava, the people I talked to, sounds like that was a one that they got pretty readily. This was aged 24 months on the lease, so there was going to be more autolytic notes on this specific one. And unfortunately, just 20% of, is it Zerolo? I don't know how to pronounce that. I should know how to pronounce that grape variety.
Yeah, I think like Trello or something.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not the best at pronunciation. So our folks that are more knowledgeable about Spanish, you can correct our
Yes,
pronunciation.
please.
Grape
But that
X.
that one, we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That one in Kava tends to kind of give those, if it's too much, a little rubbery, a little gooseberry herbal. Unfortunately, the percentage here was small. It was 20%. So I don't know if those notes really jumped out of the glass to students or not. Um, but it sounds like a lot of people distinguish it from champagne due to its riper fruits, lower acidity, stuff that you covered in your Kava webinar a few weeks ago. So the Tasmanian sparkler, I've heard some hiccups here, and they're not really hiccups. If you call this champagne, I think you're going to be you're going to gather a lot of marks. This was made
Mhm.
from a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, 55 Chard, 45 Pinot, aged 3 years on lees. So you're going to get
Mhm.
tons of autolytic notes in this Tasmanian sparkler. And I've told the story before. I'll tell it again. On my sparkling wine, I had the Roederer Estate. Um, what do you call it? It's Quartet
Quartet, yeah.
IU.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, and to me, that tasted like champagne. And
Mhm.
so that's what I called it. And my notes, there was enough overlap and enough common notes with quality and aromas and flavors that I passed. So if you're a student and you did not, it would maybe be pretty hard to call this Tasmanian sparkler, let's be honest.
Mhm.
But if you went with any traditional method sparkling wine, there's going to be enough overlap with your structure calls and your aromas and flavors. So
Yeah.
don't give up hope. I think that their main point in throwing this in wasn't necessarily to get you to go to Tasmania. but to get you to pick up on those 3 years aging on lees and stuff. So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tasmanian one would have been tough to call as Tasmanian, without a doubt. I've had Peary before. It's a very good producer.
Okay.
Tasmania is a cool climate. It's not screaming Australia warm climate to you. That's why so many, like 40% of the 40% of Tasmanian's production goes into sparkling wine on it. So yeah, going cool. I mean, even, Franciacorta, I can even see somebody going that way. Maybe they're not fully convinced it's champagne, but still wants that kind of old world aspect of it. So yeah. Totally. But all those overlaps with Mark's, I think there's gonna be a lot of good results from this test.
Yeah, I do too. And so the Tasmanian showed up in October 2020, and the Cava showed up in June 2021. So just recently. The last wine. So this can be like, students would be thrilled to see a red sparkling wine, but then they also might be like, ugh, is this going to be Lambrusco or is this Shiraz? And if you had joined or watched our webinar on Italian bubbles, we did give some tips on how to distinguish those two. And it sounds like most of the students I talked to did go with Lambrusco. Grasparosa is the more structured, full body clone. So that's tricky. There definitely could be some similarities with Shiraz for this one, because this is not your light, super fruity, more simple Lambrusco. This is going to have a degree of complexity to it. So admittedly, yes, this is going to be more confusing than some of the other Lambrusco clones. But this wine was on the October 2020 exam also. So all three of these wines are repeat customers. I don't know, obviously, we don't set the exam. We don't know if this is something WSET's thinking. Maybe with the supply chain, they kind of had to go with these. I don't know. But I was a little surprised with the repeats on both sets of exams.
It is surprising, but it is a good thing to keep you on your toes, because I know there's quite a few students that, look at the examiner reports and look at the past wines, and it's like, oh, this was on the last exam or the exam before. Okay, I don't need to study this. I don't need to prepare for it. They rule it out.
Yeah.
And this is a really, really good example that you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, agree. And just because something was on, this exam doesn't mean that they may not put it on the next one, which is that going to be May? Do we know?
I believe so, yeah. I think May.
Okay. Yeah. So don't rule out Lambrusco for May. They could put it on again. Anything goes with them. But overall, I think this is it's frustrating on the sparkling wine exam when you don't have a Prosecco or a Champagne. Fully own that. So I think a lot of people we've talked about the shoehorning or making it fit, like, well, there has to be a Champagne on here, so I'm going to call that middle one Champagne, or just don't play guessing games. If you think that something is Cava, go with Cava. Don't think that, well, there has to be something that's a tank method on here. There doesn't. There's no rhyme or reason. So go with what's in the glass, and don't try to play that guessing game, that exam guessing game mindset. So that's my advice with that. But it sounds like, and if anyone watching this has had a different experience or have any thoughts, please send us a DM. Just, we're curious how you felt about sitting this exam. But those individuals I've talked to feel pretty okay. So fingers crossed for you.
Yeah. Fortified sounded exciting, though.
Okay.
With that, so the wines in Fortified, there were also ones that were featured on previous exams. With that, two of the wines were also featured on that October 2020 exam. There was the Madeira was a 10-year, and actually I have the exact same Madeira that was featured on the exam. So I am drinking that tonight. Really good producer, and I freaking love Madeira, so of course I have it. In January 2021, I believe, they featured the 15-year. So kind of the big brother to this was featured on that. So still kind of close with that. Another case of, if you saw in past exams that these were the wines featured and you ruled it out, that was a mistake. You know, especially when you think of also sparkling and fortified, the pool of wines, you know, categories that they could feature are not that large. So repeats
Right.
are going to happen on it. It sounds like this was a case here from what I've heard from the folks that, you know, found some a little few trouble spots here. The first wine was a Muscat Baume de Venise, so a Vin de Natural. Then I believe it was the Fino that came. I knew the Fino was featured. I believe that was the second wine. And then the third one, I think, was the Madeira. I may have flipped those last two.
The
It may
Madeira
have been
was
the
the middle
Madeira
one.
second.
Yeah.
The Madeira was the
Yep.
middle one. Okay. And
Yep.
then the Fino.
Mm-hmm.
When you have those wines in the order, and this is for the folks, you know, if you haven't taken Fortified yet, or if you have and, you know, you got like D3, next one coming up, here's a really good thing to keep in mind. You never, never, never have to taste things in the order that it's poured. You can taste it in whatever order you want. So when you have those wines poured, you might want to think about what's going to mess up my palate. So like with the sparkling exam, with that Lambrusco, I definitely would not have tasted that Lambrusco first before tasting the others.
Yep.
Same thing here. That Muscat, you know, it's one that should be somewhat apparent on the nose. You know, Muscat has a very, very strong personality. You know, you got your apricot, you got your peaches, you should have some floral notes. You know, looking at this producer here, they do give a smidge of skin contact that may have tampered a little bit of that floral notes to it, but it still would have been some character that possibly jumped out and said, hey, I'm Muscat. And so, you know, from your theory, this is likely going to be sweet. So you would want to push that to the end. Worst case scenario, if you can't tell, you know, just dip your finger in the glass and take a sip just to get an idea if that's going to be sweet. So that's something to keep in mind with, like, especially again, your D3, you know, you don't know, you could have a sweet Riesling tossed in. That can mess up your palate. The other thing I would also encourage too is just a general good rule of thumb is do your nose on all three wines before you go to the palate of any of them. Because there's so much that the nose tells you, and you want to do that with as much as your mind not having any preconceptions, things dragging you down. Just really look at the glass and see what your nose is telling you. So, you know, I think the folks that did that were in good shape. I think the folks that did kind of try to do things in order, that Muscat may have messed up their palate for, you know, with the Madeira. The Madeira was always going to be the tricky one. You know, the Fino, you know, with the aldehyde notes on it, the nuttiness, you know, that was probably a good area. You know, you might have gone manzanilla with that. But for the most part, you were probably pretty safely in that kind of floor influenced sherry. You know, the Madeira is going to be the trouble spot on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was the last sparkling wine exam in October started with that sweet Moscato and then went to some drier wines. And so, yeah, I think that giving each a little sniff beforehand and being like, ooh, this one smells really intensely floral or sweet, bump that to the end, because it does sound like that could, that's going to overpower your nose with its aromas and maybe make the other two seem less aromatic than they are. So, yeah.
Yeah,
like
that's
you
an
said,
excellent point. Yeah.
you
I mean,
don't
you're
need to do
overwhelming
it
your
in
nose.
that order.
Yeah.
You don't need to do it in that order. So,
yeah. So if you're smelling, put the super pronounced one aside and then smell the less pronounced ones first. Great point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
With the Madeira, so it sounds like, you know, there's some people that, you know, didn't call Madeira, kind of went in different directions, and there's definitely other directions you can go on that. You know, one thing, looking at the Madeira here, I pulled a couple of sherries I had just to see what kind of sherries would get people. Look at this. I mean, the color, very, very similar.
Yeah.
This is a cream sherry. This is the Canasta from Williams and Humbert. This is another popular one that pops up in the exam. So, you know, Fortified is one of the few ones that you kind of look at it and the color does start telling you some things. You know, you never want to read too much in the color. But I can see some people wondering, you know, oxidative sherry with that. I also grabbed an Oloroso that's sweetened. This one's much darker because it was probably sweetened by PX versus this, which would have the must in it with the color. On the palate, those would have lower acidity and also be much sweeter on it. This one with the key with the Madeira was definitely getting the acid call. And that's where if you have that's, you know, the sweetness from the Muscat before, that might be helping tempering a little bit of that acidity. That might be balancing. This does have some sweetness as well. I mean, usually Cercial, 10-year Cercial, these will have like 45 or let's see, like around like 45 grams per liter, maybe up to 60 residual sugar compared to like the cream sherry, which would be like 130. And that muscat Bum de Venise is usually like at least 100 grams per liter, so 115, kind of that range. Those are going to be sweeter than this. And so again, you have that sweetness in your palate from the last wine that can kind of steer you in different directions.
So is this off dry, or where would you maybe put the Madeira on the sweetness scale?
So off dry is where I would put it, but it's got so much acidity that, I mean, you can see why some people would say this is dry with it. I mean, it's screaming acidity.
Okay.
Delicious though. With the wines, I think one of the things that the examiners were going for, particularly with that Fino, even though that Fino would have been a little easier to identify, is quality level. You know, that's about a 10-pound, you know, kind of everyday drinking Fino. So it most likely was in the good, maybe very good range on it. I think that would have been one of the keys with that Fino, is kind of nailing your quality assessment, because I really doubt it would come across to somebody as outstanding with that.
Okay. And again, if you went with Manzanilla, you're probably totally fine. I mean, there's so much overlap with those two styles of sherry. And I did hear a number of people, when they sat down and saw they had two white, light colored, fortified, I can't remember the date that you and I talked about using the color to kind of identify and remove suspects. They were like, ooh, I remember that I can get rid of a ton of different potential suspects here, just based on the fact that these are really light white colored fortified. So
yeah, I mean, you knew that it wasn't going to be oxidatively aged. That was the big thing that jumped out with that. Much more protective. And also, I mean, especially those that attended the port webinar that we did, I mean, looking at the colors of the wines, that even the one that is oxidative age, you can see that it is more in, you know, it doesn't have the red note, so it's more in that amber, kind of more orange with that. And it wouldn't be tawny, because it's not made from a red grape. It doesn't have any of the red notes in it. And so that would have helped you even further, because I didn't hear from many folks that they went tawny for that Madeira. It was usually like the sherries, the cream sherries were the big suspects. You know, some people that did went Madeira kind of thought maybe it was more of a basic Madeira, which is fine. You with that. I mean, wines don't always show up as evocative. I mean, for me, I'd probably rate this one myself very good. I wouldn't say this is outstanding. I feel a little bit more that heat versus warming. And the finish is not as long and involving as I would say like an outstanding Madeira. Like that 15-year that was on the previous exam, that probably would have been more outstanding.
But again, you're justifying your position. So if you, you know, you're backing it up with facts. So sometimes these wines can be in between. And if you thought the Lambrusco was just good, justify it. And if you gave enough marks showing that this is why you thought it was good and setting it between, you should be in good shape. So yeah, but they really, you know, they kind of surprised me again with their repeat customers, but I don't know.
I mean, I agree. I think these were fair wines. It is surprising, and you know, it's surprising for the folks that again think that they can pick what the wines are going to be before the exam. Yeah, Noelle and I preach this all the time. Only the examiners know what's going to be on the exam. Don't try to guess the questions. Don't try to guess the wines. You can take some feedback and see kind of what the examiners tend to prioritize, and like this is really worth focusing on. And that's what you should use. That, you know, when they provide the list of wines, when they provide their feedback, you know, use that to kind of prioritize things. But never think, oh, this is what's going to be on it. Nope, this is not going to be featured. Never go that route. Don't play those games.
Nope. It's easy to get sucked into that. But yeah, and it's good to look back always at past exam reports and see what wines do come up on the regular. Like what types of sherry. In my sherry webinar, I think it was Amontillado has come up. way more than other styles. But just because it has doesn't mean it's going to continue to do. But it's good to gather that information, use it, but just don't rely on it completely, because they could have 3 cream sherries. Wouldn't that be a nightmare?
Oh God. Then you
I
know
don't
that's a
think they
supply
would.
chain issue. You know
Yeah,
that's like, you know, the queen stopped drinking sherry, so therefore they had all these cream sherries that they needed to ship out somewhere. That would be the
could be.
case.
Could be. You never know. But yeah, we hope that everybody feels okay about how they did. Again, if you did not nail the wine, we constantly talk about this too. Just because you didn't nail the wine doesn't mean you're not going to pass. So don't panic. If you called this Tasmanian sparkler champagne, I think you're going to be just fine. There's enough overlap there. So yeah, don't. The Madeira, I did hear a number of people kind of think it was maybe an Oloroso. And so just look at what you did on the other wines and also look at your theory, because that's half of it. So yeah, I think that from what I've heard, sounds like a lot of you guys are in good shape who took the exam. Now all you have to do is just wait, was it 10 weeks?
Yeah.
A long 10 weeks?
They released the wines to kind of satisfy you just for a short time, and now the waiting begins.
It does. But I also know a lot of you are starting with your D3 exams. So Amber and I are going to start putting out some content that might be a little bit more D3 related, webinars, study suggestions. We just had someone chime in here that their diploma teacher said that you could miscall all 3 wines and still pass. It's all about
Almost
your
definitely.
tasting.
Definitely.
And yeah, like you and I did on our D3 exam, we miscalled several, but as long as there's, again, that overlap with structure, aromas, flavors, and your quality. So yeah, it's hard not to put a lot of emphasis when you get those sample wines back and you're like, ooh, I didn't call that a cava, or ooh, I didn't call that a lambrusco. Just take a step back and try to remember what you did put, or forget about it and move forward. So yeah, any other last words of wisdom for students?
No, I mean, again, we talked about the big lessons of, you know, you don't have to do the wines all in that same order. So, you know,
Yeah.
that would be the takeaway lesson from this one here. Besides, don't try to predict what's going to be on the exam.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that after these 2, the last sparkling where they started you out with a sweet wine, and this fortified where they started out with a sweet wine, do just go out of order, because that really will mess up your perception for the following wines. So and yeah, if you get a red sparkler, put that last. At least in this lineup they did have it in the last. But if for some reason that's your first wine or your middle wine, don't do that. Don't. Yeah. It's hard enough. The exam's challenging enough. So anyways, again,
tomorrow
congrats.
I've got my sorry?
Yeah, go for it. You're doing
I was gonna say,
rosé,
tomorrow
right?
I've got the rosé webinar. You're talking about the D3 stuff that we're working on. We're gonna do a blind tasting plus theory webinar. We're gonna talk about some of the wines that were featured in past exams, some of the different rosés. White Zinfandel is possible. It has showed up before. It's not all Provence rosé or all Taval with that.
Nope.
So we'll talk about some of those, and of course the examiner feedback, and we're gonna drill down into the different viticulture, climate, grape varieties, and winemaking decisions, and how they end up in the glass on that, because those are the clues that you use in these blind tasting exams. You know, theory and blind tasting, they're bosom buddies. They go hand in hand. And then you've got a great one coming up for viticulture stuff.
Yeah, and your rosé could be very helpful for D1 people, sounds like, because yeah, that's a lot of Vidi and Vinny with rosé. Yeah, and then next Thursday, I'm going to cover the different approaches to viticulture. So your conventional, your organic, sustainable, and biodynamic. I see Josh on there. He's very, he's got some opinions on biodynamic wine. So Josh, if you want to join us.
Do you promise baby sheep? Baby sheep in the vineyard?
Exactly. But yeah, I think that that's a common question for your D1 stuff. And also as you get up into MW studies, I've been looking at that too. So, and also from a marketing standpoint, because consumers, a lot of consumers want to, support the environment, and they are willing to pay more for something that is organic or biodynamic, even if they really don't understand what it means. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, cheers to everybody who took the exam. You're done with this. Focus on what's ahead. Reach out to us. We're happy to help. Whatever you need, we're here for you. So,
All right.
you got this. Okay. Take care.
Take care.